and welcome again to one of our Seven Head Women Entrepreneurship series here on our WebEx. And we want to welcome Ms. Nancy Alvarez again because she was a previous speaker. So thank you, Nancy, for joining us one more time. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Melissa. Thank you so much for having me again in this forum.
Thank you. Now, as all of you may know or may not know, and she will speak about this shortly here in her introduction for her presentation, Nancy is with the SBA, and today she will be talking about federal contracts and how to market to the government. So if you have any questions that are not covered on the presentation, or that are maybe like one circumstance or another, you can always send us a question through the chat. And then if that question is not answered today, we can send those to Nancy and she can help you further. So thank you very much. I'll leave it up to you, Nancy.
Sure. Raul, you can move to the next slide. In the meantime, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. We're going to be talking about marketing and selling to the federal government. Let's move on to our next slide. We got a lot to cover during this 1 hour. We're going to cover government contracting suitability, what it is, how the government buys goods and services, marketing your business and identifying federal opportunities, which is so important. You want to have this information readily available. We're going to talk about the prime and subcontracting relationship. And lastly, we will cover how the government can help you in this journey. So let's move on to our next slide. Really briefly, I am going to leave my bio. I think everybody's going to have access to this presentation anyway, so I'm not going to read throughout. I just want to point out that I've been with the SBA for over 23 years. I came to the DFW area in 2011 as the head of the 8A Business Development Program and also the Women Business Representative. I have oversight of the 8A Business Development Program, and one of my responsibilities is to increase contracting opportunity for small businesses. So let's move on to our presentation today. Next slide. On suitability, we're going to be talking about are you a small business, right? And how to gain access to contracting opportunities utilizing SBA small business set-aside programs. And the first question you should be asking yourself is whether you're a small business. The SBA determines size of an enterprise based on what's called a North American Industrial Classification Code, NAICS for short. So moving forward, I'm going to refer to this as a NAICS code. And so NAICS are determined, each NAICS or each industry has its own corresponding size, which can be based on gross revenues or number of employees. There is no specific legal structure requirement. You can be any kind of legal structure. You can even be a sole proprietorship and still do business with the federal government. You must be operating your business primarily at the United States and contributing certainly to the economy, paying taxes, etc. There are certain industries or certain entities that do not qualify to do business with the federal government. Those would include companies that are primarily operating their businesses outside the United States, or if you are a non-for-profit organization, you do not qualify for doing business with the government as a small business set aside. So you can do business with the government, but not necessarily participate in small business set aside programs. Let's go through our next slide to talk a little bit about North American Industrial Classifications Code. Do you know your NAICS code? This is very important, and the corresponding size. NAICS codes define specific establishments and are used for administrative, contracting, and even tax purposes. So again, if you are going to participate in federal contracting, that's usually what the government uses to determine, for example, a product or service. If I, as a contracting officer, I'm going to list a product or services, I'm going to use the NAICS code primarily that will entail most of that contracting opportunity. If you want to know more about NAICS code or which ones might be your NAICS code, you can visit the Census Bureau's website and use a keyword to determine which one is your specific NAICS code. Let's move on to our next slide. And so once you have determined your NAICS code, it is important for you, in order to determine whether or not you are ready to do business with the federal government, you need to do a little bit of market research and determine, first of all, whether the government buys what you have to offer. If there isn't a market for you in the federal government, why even go through the process of getting certified or registering? So it's important for you to do your market research to determine whether or not the government does buy what you have to offer, and then how big is the market, right? Then there comes two terms that I use a lot in determining whether you are contractor ready, and that is, do you have the financial capacity and the technical capacity? And the next box talks about what your financial capacity should entail, right? It means whether you have the cash inventory and working capital needed to perform on a contract. This is very important. You have to understand that if you do not evaluate your capability to perform on a federal contract, you can later on default on a contract, and then you will be placed on a DBAR list, which means you won't be able to do business with the federal government. So in assessing your capability, you're going to be looking potentially at your technical capacity to perform. Do I have the staff in-house? Am I going to have to recruit? Am I going to subcontract out that portion of the contract? So again, these are very important questions that you're going to need in order to determine whether or not you're going to move forward to do business with the federal government. And lastly, certainly you need to know where to identify those opportunities. Where do I find these opportunities once I go through this process? So let's move on to our next slide so we can start talking about specifically how the government buys goods and services. Let's move on. The first thing is that the government conducts competition at different levels, right, to acquire goods and services. One key important aspect of this is that the federal government is the largest buyer of goods and services in the world. The government buys in excess of $500 billion in goods and services every year. And by law, 23% of government spending has to be reserved for small businesses. That's just the law. There's certain ways in which the government does competition, and we'll talk a little bit more at length about it. But the government will conduct competition as a full and open. They can do small business set-asides, meaning competition reserved strictly for small businesses, or they can do what's called sole source, where they're not competing. They are awarding the contract to a specific contractor. So let's move on to the next slide so we can talk a little bit about the types of competitions. So full and open, which we highlighted before, this is where the government goes out and posts a solicitation, and anyone who is a responsible contractor can bid on that solicitation. Responsible meaning you have the financial and technical capacity to perform on a contract. When we look at the small business set-asides, the contracting officers are making sure that at least 2 small businesses will be able to perform on the contract and submit a price that is fair and reasonable for the government. Also, in the small business set-asides, the procuring agency or the contracting officer is going to look at the non-manufacturing rule. This is basically where if you are a small business providing a product, the government is going to reserve it as a small business set-aside as long as that product that you're providing is a product of a small business manufacturer, if you're not the small business manufacturer. So again, these are some rules that can be a little complicated for small businesses to grasp, And I would encourage you to contact the SBA or some of the resources we're going to provide to you at the end of the presentation, where you can request a consultation. The counseling is free of charge, so we're available to answer those questions, and we can go more in detail into this non-manufacturing rule, which can trip up some people. I've had some contractors that said, look, I've been trying to sell to the government hairspray for the past 3 years, and I don't know why I can't get an offer. Well, that product might be listed on this non-manufacturing rule, and that's the reason why you don't see it reserved for small businesses, because they know that's going to be hard to find a small business manufacturer, so they don't put it on the list. There is another thing that's called a waiver to the non-manufacturing rule. If a product has a waiver, that means that a small business can provide that product regardless of whether it comes from another small business. So again, it's a little complicated rule. So I would encourage you to contact us if you have questions or doubts that the product that you're planning on offering to the government might fall on this category. Then as a small business, for any set aside, you are required to meet what's called the subcontracting limitation. That means that a certain percentage of that contract has to be performed with employees under your own payroll. In other words, W-2 employees. And the requirement will vary based on your industry, okay? So if you're a general contractor, 15% of the work has to be performed with your own labor force. Again, there are other requirements for service contracts, manufacturing contracts, but you need to make sure that you understand what that is, because you're going to have to comply with that requirement. Then on the sole source category, sole source are allowed when, for example, you're the only small business providing that product or service, or if the government has a compelling urgency for that particular service or product. There are some other categories, like, for example, there is an international agreement in place that will allow you to provide that product or service on a sole source basis, meaning non-competitive. It's authorized if it's in the public's best interest or if it's national security. Also, there can be a sole source if it is authorized or required by law. And lastly, it is allowed if it's under certain small business contracting and business development program, like the 8A program. Let's go to our next slide. This is a slide just to emphasize the federal requirement or the statutory procurement goals as it pertains to contracting. So remember, we spoke earlier that 23% has to be reserved for small business. Well, the law also backs up these 4 different categories. There is a 5% procurement goal for women-owned small businesses, 5% for small disadvantaged businesses, including 8A contractors, 3% for hub zone businesses. And in the state of Texas, I want to emphasize hub and hub zone is not the same. So understand the difference between these 2 certifications. One is at the state level. The hub zone is at the federal level. And they can't be used interchangeably. And the federal government will not accept other certifications other than these 5 that we're talking about, small business and these 4. And the state might not accept some of these certifications as well. So this is very important for you to understand. Lastly, there is a 3% procurement goal for service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses. And lastly, I want to highlight on this slide that any requirement, in other words, any solicitation between $10,000, which is considered the micro purchase threshold, and $250,000, which is considered the simplified acquisition threshold, anything between those levels is automatically reserved for small business competition. Okay, let's go to our next slide. We're going to talk about how the government buys goods and services. And the primary method for the government to contract is The first thing I'm going to highlight here is the levels. This is very important because if you're a small businesses and your products fall within the micro purchase, really, the micro purchase threshold, which is less than $10,000, you have to be prepared to provide and accept credit cards. Okay, the government will not buy below that threshold if it's not used with a credit card. So again, if you are within this range and what you offer are going to be micro purchases to the government, you have to be prepared to accept credit cards. That's going to be very important on the micro purchase level. Under the simplified acquisition process, you have purchases between $10,000 and $250,000. This is usually done through competition, but the simplified acquisition process is a lot shorter. It's not your normal complicated process. So if you're going to do sealed bidding, these are going to be requirements that you will provide a proposal based on price. Usually this is based on price, right? So I'm going to submit, the government is not looking necessarily at technicality or your technical capacity. It's going to be based on price. And these are usually sealed bids. And the name says it itself. It's a sealed bid. At the time that they open, they make the selection, usually based on the lowest price. Okay, and whoever bid the lowest price gets that award. And then the last way that the government contracts is through contract by negotiations. And these are usually contracting opportunities above the $150,000, and they're technical in nature. So the government will put out a solicitation. There are some technical issues, or most of it is technical in nature, and requires the dialogue and the conversation between the contractor and the government. And therefore, the price has to be negotiated. So those are the ways in which potentially you can contract with the federal government. Let's go to the next slide. And we'll cover the types of different contracts. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time in here because this can be very technical, but it's certainly important for you to understand the type of contract you're getting involved in. And so if you want more information, you can either contact our resource partners for more information on the type of contracts, or you can certainly read on the FARs, which outlines specifically what is a indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity, but we'll use the indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contract as an example. This is where the government might engage with you in a contract for 5 years. They don't know specifically what they're going to need you to provide. Like, for example, this might be for construction services, repairs, but they don't know what repairs they're going to need. So they'll engage in indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. And as the need arises, they're going to issue a task order against your IDIQ. That's another short name for it, IDIQ. So again, time, material, and labor, kind of self-explanatory. Incentive, fixed price, which also comes with an economic price and incentive, and then the cost reimbursement. Again, there's definition for all of them. The explanation kind of gives you an idea what it might be, but there might be a little bit more into it. So again, if you run across this type of contract and you're not sure exactly what you're up against, just don't hesitate to give the SBA or one of our resource partners the opportunity to help you understand what you're getting into. So let's go to our next slide. So these are basic order agreements, better known as BOA, or blanket purchase agreement, better known as a BPA. Again, this is government lingo. We're going to talk about government lingo in a couple of slides coming up. But the basic order agreement is not a contract. It expedites contracting for the federal agency on uncertain requirements that are below, or excuse me, above the simplified acquisition threshold. By contrast, the blanket purchase order is just a method of fulfilling anticipated repetitive needs for supplies and services that are below the simplified acquisition threshold. So again, these are, and it's important for you to understand whether you are engaging in a contract or if it's not a contract. And if it's, for example, a blanket purchase agreement, then it's usually going to be below the simplified acquisition threshold, and it's going to be for repetitive orders of product or service. Let's go to our next slide. We're going to talk moving forward about marketing your business and identifying federal opportunities, and we can go on. And the first thing that I'm going to highlight in this section is that it's so important for you to do market research. I provide quarterly a class on market research. And the reason why is because oftentimes people venture into government contracting, but they don't understand the market. They don't even know if there's a market for them in the federal government. So conducting market research is important. It's important because you want to know if the government buys what you have to offer, right? It's also important because you want to identify a niche. You just want to target that niche. You don't want to market to the federal government and take a kind of a shotgun approach because, small businesses don't have the resources to approach the government in that way. So it's important for you to identify a niche and just stick with that niche. Understand areas of government spending. Again, this goes to the fact whether the government buys what I have to offer, and then how do they buy it? Because if the way that the government acquires the good or service that you have to offer is through the GSA schedule, then you're going to have to pursue the GSA schedule. We'll talk a little bit later on about what the GSA schedule is. It's also important for you to do market research because you want to know who your competition is. In repetitive contracts, most often you're going to find that you're going to have to be competing with somebody that is already performing on the contract. So you need to know your competition. Why? Because you're going to be up against somebody that already holds that contract, and you're going to have to present to that federal agency a better proposal, right? Why should they be doing business with you rather than somebody that they're already currently doing business with? So let's go to our next slide. All I want you to understand on this slide is that the acquisition process is complicated, right? And it captures, there are different people involved in the process. So at one point or another, you might communicate with one of these individuals. And so it's important for you to understand the role they play in the acquisition process, from the end user, who's the agency that's going to be using the product or service, to the buyer. And the buyer is not necessarily the end user. There are agencies that buy on behalf of different agencies because they don't have the manpower to have their own buyers. So they go to another agency to buy. SBA point of contact. SBA plays a key role. Our job is to be advocates for small businesses. So anytime we see an opportunity that can be reserved or performed by a small business, we are going to advocate to that agency that they reserve it for small business competition. There's also the small business specialist, which is usually a person within the agency whose job it is to make sure that they connect small businesses with end users or the buyers, making sure that the agency understands who is out there, what small businesses out there and that can fulfill their requirements. And lastly, you have the influencers. And sometimes while the influencers can be one of these individuals that we've already highlighted, you can have influencers like people that are technical in nature. Like, for example, if you have a requirement that involves engineering and you have an engineering in that group, that engineer is going to be an influencer based on his knowledge of the subject matter at hand. Let's go to our next slide. These are ingredients to making a favorable impression. At this point, you are communicating with the agency directly. You're going to market yourself to the agency. And it's so important to make a first good impression. So to do that, the first thing that I would advise you to do is familiarize yourself with the agency, what it buys, their mission statement, what is their vision. You want to understand what the agency is doing, what their mission is, because your role is to place yourself in that same area. In other words, how am I going to help you obtain or meet your mission? Okay. And that is so important, understanding that when you're talking to them. Okay, you need to give them the impression that you've done your research, that you understand what it is that they're buying and what is their mission. Their mission can be to prepare trainers in the Navy to fly out these missions. So how are you going to help them achieve that mission? Be prepared to deliver a concise elevator speech. I can tell you that these individuals are in high demand. Everybody wants to talk to them. Everybody wants to market themselves to them. So you have to be prepared to make that favorable impression in a short period of time. That could be 5 minutes, but that 5 minutes can lead to a 30-minute meeting if the agency is interested. So prepare a 5-minute elevator speech. Practice it. Okay, because you might use it, and that elevator speech can land you a 30-minute meeting with that agency. If you have a business card, make sure you include your certification if you're certified on your business card. Look, I always tell small businesses, if you have a business card and the back of your business card is blank, you are not maximizing that tool. You're not maximizing your business card. In federal contracting, you need to maximize any little space you have to share information with the contracting officer. You can include your NAICS code in the back of your card. You can even include your certifications. So moving forward, if you have a business card and it's blanked in the back of the card and you're planning on doing business with the federal government, make sure you add that, because you want to signal to the federal government that you are ready to do business with them. Okay. And some of the information you put on your business card can signal whether or not you're ready to do business with the federal government. Okay. Capability statement. Capability statement is equivalent to a brochure in the private sector. When you're in the private sector, you use a brochure. When you are doing business with the federal government, you use what's called a capability statement. So let's move on to the next slide so we can talk about what is a capability statement, what it looks like, what it does for you. And a capability statement really illustrates or shows what your purpose is, right? It can prove your qualifications, your ability to perform on federal contract, and it also introduces yourself to the federal agency. It can be used as a marketing tool. It will help you open doors in the federal marketplace because contracting officers are expecting for you to provide a capability statement. It's also a great way to captivate your customers because you're going to put key elements in that capability statement that are going to attract the attention. Okay, what is it? Well, it's the equivalent of a personal resume. In this case, it's going to be a business resume to introduce your company. But it is also a relationship builder. If a contracting officer picks up your capability statements, by a glance, they can usually determine whether or not you're a perfect fit for them. So again, it starts a conversation and it helps you build relationships. How do you use it? Well, there's different ways to use it. You can use it when you're marketing yourself to prime contractors, or let's say you want to be a part of a teaming agreement. If you want to pursue opportunities, you can use your capability statement. You can also use it in response to the government sources sought or in response to a request for information responses or request for proposals or request for bids. These are all different informational tools that the government has. So it is appropriate for you to use it in any of these instances, as well as when you are communicating directly with the federal agency via an email. Attach it to the email when you're introducing yourself. So there is many uses for a capability statement, but the most important thing is for you to understand that a proper or a properly structured capability statement signals to the agency that you know what you're talking about, you're talking the government language, and that you are prepared to do business with the federal government, as long as you include the key components. Let's look at our next slide for what are those components that you incorporate into a capability statement. That includes a logo if you have one, and any branding elements of your company. They're good to include in your capability statement. It also includes your corporate data, like your location. And if you have location in different areas, it's important for you to highlight them. If you're dealing with a contracting officer who's responsible for the Southeast region, he might not have something for you in the Southeast region, but maybe he has something for you in the Northeast, where you also have let's say a satellite office or another office located. And if you only list the one in that area, he's not aware that you also do business in the Northeast, he might not refer you. So he doesn't have anything right now for the Southeast region, but he might know that there is something in the Northeast region and would be able to refer you if the information is captured in the capability statement. Company data like your financial stability or capacity to perform on a federal contract is important, and things that you capture there as well. Number of employees, and if you have teaming agreements, are also important for you to highlight. Having your DUNS, CAGE, and NAICS code in your capability statement is a must. This is really talking about those signals about you being ready. This is it, because if you don't have a DUNS number, you're not ready to do business with the federal government. If you're not registered in SAMS, you're not ready to do business with the federal government. So again, these are signals that without you realizing it, you're sending to the agency, letting them know that you are ready. Things like past performance, show the benefits. When you talk about past performance, you're usually referring to contracts maybe similar to what you're pursuing with that agency. And the benefits is that they know that you've done this type of work. So you don't have to be trained. You've already done that kind of work, you know what you're doing, and it ensures that they have a successful performance on that contract. List your past customers. This is important too. Federal agencies communicate with one another. If you've done work for another agency, they might call that agency and say, hey, listen, I have this company here. They indicated that you were a customer in the past. Do you have anything that any evaluations that you did for this contractor? And that's going to really help you. Type of contracts that you're performed on. Again, this is going to be very important, because if we're talking one of the contracts that we highlighted before, like an indefinite delivery, an incentive contract, then they know that you have performed on that kind of contract, and they know that you understand what your expectations are, or what their expectations are with regards to that type of contract. The capability statement is going to have unique features that it's important for you to address, like what sets you apart from your competition. Remember, I highlighted earlier, you might be pursuing a contract that is already being performed by another small business, okay? So what sets you apart from your competition? What are you good at? And highlighting that in your capability statement is important. What is the benefits? Again, highlight if you are providing a benefit, don't be scared to address what that benefit is to the agency. They might not, if you're thinking that they should know what the benefit is, you're just not going to prepare yourself well enough in a capability statement. So don't be afraid to highlight what the benefits to them are going to be. And then lastly, your social economic certifications. If you have any of the certifications, highlight them. They're going to be very important. Again, remember that by law, they have to meet those percentage of contracting opportunities. So you want to make sure you highlight. If you're insured and you have bonding capacity, make sure you highlight what the capacity is, because that way they know that you have the capacity to bond that contract. Next slide. These are just some helpful tips to prepare a capability statement. Capability statement should not be more than one page. You can certainly use the front and the back of that page to maximize the space. Make it visually appealing, okay? Pictures are acceptable. Just don't decorate the whole page with pictures, but they are very helpful. If you have a website, include your link. That way they can research your website for more information on what you do. Don't be afraid to use bullet tablets and highlight sections. There's sometimes one section that you want to highlight that may be past performance or differentiators, right? What makes you stick out from your competition? So there might be areas you want to highlight. Don't be afraid to highlight those areas. Make sure that you're checking the spelling and the grammar in your capability statement. You don't want to send, just like you wouldn't send your personal resume with grammatical errors and misspelled words. You don't want to do the same with a capability statement. And then be concise, current in the information. If you're ISO 9000 certified, you were 9000 certified 20 years ago, then don't put it if it's not relevant, okay? Because again, the information should be relevant. If they're looking for an ISO 9000 contractor and you were certified 9 years ago, but you're not now, it's going to take you a while to get certified ISO 9000. So again, keep your information current. And lastly, where appropriate, use government language. Remember I spoke about the BPAs. Well, if you are a contractor engaged in a GWAC contract, highlight that you have a GWAC contract. They know what it is. They understand the lingo. Again, when it's appropriate, there is some lingo specifically in the private sector. Don't use that lingo because they might not know what it is. But if it relates to government contracting, feel free to use it. Let's go to our next slide. All right. And here we're talking about the meeting and key to successful meetings. And I'm going to highlight, don't be afraid to request a meeting. Everybody does. Again, point out, do your homework before you request your meeting and give a reason for the meeting. Usually your reason is going to be, I'd like to discuss my capabilities for future contract opportunities. Conduct a pre-meeting research and keep track of past, current, and future opportunities, okay, so that you can highlight them. And then post-meeting, don't forget to, if you keep your word. If you made a promise during that meeting, keep your word. Follow up and make sure that you provide whatever it is that you promised you were going to do. Write a thank you note. Be courteous, say thank you for the time that you spend with me, and ask them to share information that might help you in the future if there isn't an opportunity, like potentially maybe a future opportunity, maybe not this year, but next year, that you can put on your radar and then follow up with them. Writing a government marketing plan. This is so important. The government fiscal year starts on October the 1st and ends on September 30th. You should create a plan. During the first quarter, you should be raising awareness and building relationship with the agencies. During quarter 2 and 3, which is January to June, you should be generating leads, okay? A campaign to follow up on those opportunities that you marked of interest to yourself and, following up on those responses. And then on the last quarter, the last minute offer and awareness campaign. The money is running out, okay, or time is running out for the agency to spend that money. And this is a great opportunity for you to flag them again and say, hey, I'm here. If you're running out of time and you need to award on a sole source basis, remember, I'm participating in the 8A program. Speaking of government lingo, again, I'm not going to emphasize each one of this. Wherever it is appropriate, make sure that you use government lingo and ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Stress your contracting expertise, okay? And always proofread any messages you're sending to the agency. Let's move to our next slide. Finding the decision makers. Procurement forecast is a good way. It will list who's responsible for that contracting opportunity. Call and make an appointment and find out, who's the person responsible for this requirement. Network. This is key. Network, and meet with the small business specialist for the agency. And lastly, respond to the invitation to bid, okay? Or sources sought. This is going to be very important. Let's see which is our next slide. I think we're wrapping up. We're going to talk really briefly about subcontracting and prime relationships. Let's move to the next slide. And basically the definition: as a prime, you're the primary person responsible for the contract. A subcontractor is a person or a business that gets awarded a portion of that contract. In a prime and subcontract relationship, the prime is responsible for that contract. It's important that you work hand in hand with your prime contractor. This is going to ensure that you're able to perform successfully on the contract. Let's move to our next slide. If you don't have past performance, I would encourage you to start by trying to find subcontracting opportunities. You can gain some experience by being the prime to a contract. You can also see teaming agreement, joint venture, or mentor project. If you have any questions regarding these kind of tools and how to use them or how to implement them, please contact our office or one of our resource partners. But all in hand, these opportunities are going to help you gain experience and expand your potential for more opportunities. Let's move to our next slide. How can the government help? Let's go to our next slide. And these certainly are all your resources. You can reach out to the SBA. We have personnel here that are in position to help you. That would be a business opportunity specialist or procurement center representative. You can also reach out to the Procurement Technical Assistance Center. This is a non-for-profit organization funded by Department of Defense, responsible for providing contracting, government contracting assistance. They will also provide consulting. They offer workshops, and they will help you with information or additional resources if you need them. If you're going to do some market research, these are some of the websites you can Google. If you get a copy of the presentation, there should be a link for you where you can link directly. FedBizOps, Federal Procurement Database System, System for Award Management, where you're going to have to register if you want to do business with the government. Dynamic Small Business Search, and the Subcontracting Network System, which is a place where you can find subcontracting opportunities. Lastly, these are some additional resources. USAspending.gov is a great way to find out what the government buys and in what quantities. GSA Subcontracting Directory and DoD Prime Contracting Directory. This is great if you're looking for subcontracting opportunities with GSA or Department of Defense. Let's move. GSA, if you want to do business with the government, some agencies buy directly through GSA. If you have a contract with GSA, the agency can offer you, they can issue a task order against your GSA contract. So being on the GSA contract is nothing more than having a contract, an open contract, where a task order can be issued by any agency that wants to use GSA. So there's a lot of business, there's a lot of benefits for being a GSA contractor, both for the agency as well for the small business, and you can market yourself as a GSA contractor. So let's move to our next slide. How to get started. You need to register in SAM. You'll need a DUNS number, a cage code. Don't worry about this terminology. Just go directly to SAM to register. And when it gets to the point where you need to submit your DUNS number, there'll be a link there that you can apply for the DUNS number through that website. That will give you a free DUNS number. Fairly easy. It's kind of a process. And until your profile is active, you can't start doing business with the federal government. I'm not going to expand a lot on FBO. This is where the agencies post their requirements, but this website has been moved to SAM. So you can do everything in SAM, including not only registering, but looking for the opportunities. Let's move to our next slide. Get to work. Okay, submit those bids, find those opportunities in FedBizOps, evaluate your pricing, submit your proposal, get with the agencies who can assist you if you want to evaluate whether or not you're submitting a price within the range, and then submit your bid and wait for the response. Once you get the response, you might need to be prepared to present an oral presentation. Just be ready. And lastly, request a debriefing, whether you win that requirement or not. request a debriefing. That's going to be feedback to prepare yourself for the next proposal that you submit. Let's go to our next slide. And basically, we've come to the end of our presentation, but I want to leave you with the fact that SBA is listed on all these social media websites. You can also follow me in LinkedIn. I'll post upcoming training seminars that are available. And let's move to our next slide, which is the question and answer. If you leave this webinar and we haven't gotten to your question, you can contact the SBA at the 1-800-SBA help desk. They'll be more than happy to answer your question. If not, let's move to our next slide, where I will provide you my contact information, and you can certainly get a hold of me by either calling me direct or sending me an email to my email address, and I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. So, Melissa, I'm going to transfer it over to you.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm having a little trouble there unmuting myself. But that is a lot of information. I'm sure it's been very helpful for all our audience that was interested in this particular topic. And we do have the questions that have been flowing in while you were going through your slides. One in particular comment that came in at the beginning was from Cheryl, and she says, Nancy is incredible. She helped me so much. She really cares. So thank you, Nancy, for everything that you do for our community and our small businesses.
Oh, thank you, Cheryl.
Now like I said, these questions are rolling in. So I do have somebody that was asking, I am a DoD employee and own a construction business. I believe I cannot contract with DoD, but how about other federal entities?
Certainly. Again, that's why I say that the market research is so important, because it's not just one agency. DoD is the largest buyer of goods and services within the federal government because they have so many different agencies underneath. But there could be opportunities for your product or service in any other agency. Again, that's why the market research is so important.
Thank you. Another question that came in was, how do we find the contract listings and what is the engagement process and the URLs?
Sure. So you find the opportunities in the FedBizOpps. Those are active opportunities or opportunities that were recently awarded. So again, you identify an opportunity in the FedBizOpps, you prepare your proposal, and you submit it. The agency will provide information on who got awarded the contract. Okay, so you'll be notified. If you're not the successful awardee, you'll get informed that you were not the successful awardee. But that, in a nutshell, is the process. And again, if you do not get an award, it's so important for you to follow up with the agency and request a debriefing, because it will only help you get better. It will identify where your weaknesses were, okay? And you can take advantage of that information to prepare a proposal, a better proposal the next time around.
That is a great idea. And we have another question that came in that says, how do we get the information on the competition?
Great information. Thank you for that question. You can go to, number one, the Federal Business Opportunity website. That's where all the solicitations are coming in. But remember, they also post who got awarded the contract. Okay, so you're getting information there on who your competition is. But if you go to the Federal Procurement Database System, and you can Google it, okay? Federal Database Procurement System, that will give you historical data on what the government has bought in previous years, okay? And so you'll identify, because it will tell you what contractors got that award. And that's how you start your search. Once you know what contract they got, then you can do searches in other websites to identify what the contractor does, okay? And how to better position yourself.
Another question that's very similar to that one was, how do we get in contact with the agency and communicate?
Great. So if you, there's different ways. I know that for my region, government contracting, Region 5, which includes, I think it's 8 states, we have a directory of the contact information for the federal agencies in our local area. So that's one way. You can request it either from me, or you can request it from the government contracting office, who is located with us. They're co-located in our building. That's one way. The other way is to go to the acquisition.gov website and type Procurement Forecast. That will give you a listing of agencies, their requirement for, let's say, maybe this year or the next year, and who is the contact person. So you're going to have their email address and their phone number.
Okay. Now you spoke a lot about capability statements. We did have a question. They were wondering, how do they find an example of a capability statement?
Google the word capability statement, okay? Then click on the image. And when you get to the image, you're going to see a lot of different examples. Please note that each one of them calls it a capability statement. That's very important. You might think it's not, important to name it a capability statement, but again, signaling to the government that you know what you're talking about, label it capability statement. But again, Google the word capability statement and click in images, and you're going to get many examples. You can also reach out to our resource partners. They'll be more than happy to give you feedback on your capability statement.
Great. That's great to know that you guys offer that. Now, I saw a question that came in, and I think this is a great question, and it is, how do you raise awareness and build relationships from outside DC and during a time of COVID?
That is such a great question. Everybody's evolving, right? And everybody is evolving into this virtual forum, right? All agencies, listen, federal agencies are required to conduct conferences, expos, right? Why? Because they're trying to search for small businesses that are qualified. Well, we can't do that in this type of environment. So they have reverted to virtual conferences. And a lot of these conferences they do on a yearly basis have transitioned into a virtual format. Look for them. And if you can't find them, connect with the SBA. We'll be more than happy to connect you with upcoming procurement conferences. We have one local here in the area put by the Procurement Technical Assistance Center. They usually do it every August. I think this year fell in September. But again, they were going virtual with that. Again, stay in touch with the SBA. We'll connect you with those resources.
Thank you, Nancy. We have another question that came in, and this question is, well, it's a comment and then a question. They want to thank you that this is all great information, but what systems do we use and how do we find the contracts?
Great. So again, the system, you're going to go to SAM or beta.sam.gov. That's one of the websites. SAM right now is holding a number of different databases, including the Federal Business Opportunity, which I highlighted in the presentation. That's where the contracting officers post the opportunities. That's one location where you can find opportunities. Again, the other one is kind of more of a market research. If the government has purchased this in the past, they're more likely to purchase in the future. So check the Federal Procurement Database System. And that will give you some information on what the government has intentions of buying. And again, don't forget, the Procurement Forecast is the government's wish list. This is what I want to buy this year or next year. Be prepared. Again, put it in your marketing plan.
Someone asked the same question, but also added, is there a reference manual on engagement?
Wow. No, there isn't a reference manual, but certainly many people in the government, many of our resource partners who were contracting officers, and they're there to counsel you. And the counseling is free of charge. Listen, this is one thing that it's like beating a dead horse because it is so important. There are so many resources, and these resources are free. Take advantage of them because they're not charging you by appointment. You can call them as often as you want to get answers to these questions, and they're there to provide the answers. So what other manual do you need than somebody who has the expertise to answer the questions that you have?
And following up with that, and I know we spoke about this briefly before we started the presentation, but somebody's asking, how do I certify 8A, which I think we have not covered.
Yeah, certifications. Well, we did highlight certifications, but we did not talk about how to apply for them. And certainly each one has a criteria. I want to highlight that every month, every Wednesday of every month, or the first Wednesday of every month, we have a 2-hour virtual class that we go over these certifications and the qualifications, the criteria, and then how to apply. But in a nutshell, anybody that wants to get certified first has to register in SAM. Go to SAM, establish your profile. If you're going to apply for the 8A program, once your profile is active in SAM, you can move to certify.sba.gov to apply online for the 8A program.
Thank you, Nancy. Somebody's commenting, I work with a telephone manufacturer. How do we get on a GSA contract to help out our 600 partners close deals easier?
So you can contact GSA. They do have a small business specialist. As a matter of fact, here in the DFW area, his name is Albert Garza. I don't have his contact information because I didn't anticipate that question. But if you email me, I'll be more than happy to give you his contact information. If not, you can Google it. His name is, sometimes I don't have it readily available, and I Google Albert Garza with GSA, and it will give you his contact information and his email address.
Thank you, Nancy. I know we're trying to get in as many questions as possible. We have something here also commenting on how helpful you have been. So thank you for everything that you do. The question is there a niche for small business consultants to connect with resource partners and reach small business owners who need one-on-one assistance to complete some of the preparation tasks that the resource partners don't do?
That's a great question. So every certain amount of years, the SBA puts out a grant under the 7J management and technical assistance. And that grant is for contractors that can provide counseling to small businesses that want to do business with the federal government. So if you're interested in providing that kind of service under the grant program, I would encourage you to be in the lookout under the grants.gov website, where SBA publishes those grants. There's one right now that just closed, and it's for a women's business center. So again, these grants come up every so often for exactly that, finding contractors with expertise that can provide that kind of expertise to small businesses.
Thank you, Nancy. Someone is asking for the forecast link. I'm not sure if you had that up.
Yes, go to www.acquisition.gov, and in the search box, type Procurement Forecast, and you'll get a link to it. And actually, if I well remember, I just checked it a few days ago on the main web page. On the main web page, if you scroll to the bottom, you're going to see Procurement Forecast. Just click on there, and you'll be able to access for all the agencies that are listed.
Okay, Nancy, we are wrapping up here. I did want you to announce something that you mentioned to me earlier before we started the presentation, because I asked if the SBA had any new rollouts, and you mentioned something about certifications. If you would like to share with the audience.
Sure. So lately, this is the year where we've put out so many rule changes. And one of the most recent changes, there's two that I want to highlight, was size determination. So on January the 6th of this year, the SBA put out a new rule where size will be determined on a 5-year basis instead of a 3-year basis. This is really beneficial for a lot of businesses that were bordering not meeting the size standard. So if you are in that boat where you might not meet the size standard based on a 3-year, there's a 2-year grandfathering period where we will allow you to determine size on a 3-year or a 5-year. And then the other change that we have this year that was significant was where women owners will not be able to self-certify themselves no longer after October 15, and you will have to apply to the SBA. You do not have to pay for that certification. However, if you choose to go to a third party to get certified as a women-owned, you might have to pay that third-party certifier. But that is not the case if you select to do it through the SBA.
Thank you, Nancy, for making that announcement. I just wanted to make sure all the women-owned businesses that were listening to us had that information. Nancy, I thank you again so very much because you're always so thorough and try to answer all our questions that the audience has for you. So we thank you one more time. And now I will invite Raul back. Raul, are you there?
Yes, yes, and thank you. Wow, what a presentation, Nancy. Thank you for all that information and knowledge. And everyone that attended, you will be receiving the PowerPoint presentation as a PDF format in the next couple of weeks as we need to download the list. One more time, thank you for Ford Motor Company sponsoring this event. Again, Nancy, thank you for your time. You're a great presenter. Thank you for joining us. Melissa, as always, great job.